Hello everybody and welcome to part 21. Today we're going to do something I wasn't originally going to cover, and that's getting the enemies to shoot back at the player. Originally I thought I quite liked the kind of metaphor of our game of the player being unambiguously quite horrible, being the only person with a gun mowing down all these innocent people. But lots of people want to know how to deliver on having enemies shoot back, and I think it's an important thing to cover. We've covered a few things with the enemies, and because the coding behavior for a thing that's automated is very different from coding that same behavior for something that the player controls, because you've got to provide the input yourself in a way. And so we've done some of that with the enemy, getting them to walk around and not walk off edges and that kind of thing. But how do we get them to shoot at the player in a way that's kind of similar to how the player shoots at them? Well, that's what we're going to look at today. So I've made a couple of things for this, well, just one thing mostly, and that's this Sprite SE bullet. I've made sort of a fatter, slightly different coloured version of our bullet sprite, and we're going to use this to distinguish bullets shot by the enemy from bullets shot by the player, because we're going to make them move a bit slower as well, so the player has opportunity to dodge them, and so on, okay? And just for game feedback reasons, I think it's better if they look a bit different. The other thing I guess you'll notice if you take a look at the levels, is I've actually got rid of the crates that we had there before that we were like shooting through. I actually didn't like the direction we were taking the game in with that. Also, the crates themselves, I feel like they need some more polish. We might come back to these in, say, Season 2, if you will, of this series. But for now, I feel like the crates weren't adding much, and they honestly didn't. I changed them around a bit. You've already seen I changed the sprite for them. I feel like they didn't quite live up to the quality that everything else kind of has in the game so far. So we might come back to those and look into crates and destroying other things with the gun and doing stuff like that actually feels as nice and as polished as everything else in the game does. But for now I've taken them away just so that we can get something that really feels polished and complete. And this wouldn't be, of course, in making a complete game if it didn't include cutting features at some point or other, right? So how are we going to get our enemies to shoot back at us? Well, we're going to follow a very similar procedure to how we got to shoot bullets ourselves in the first place. We're going to need a version of O-Gun, so we're going to create a new object similar to O-Gun. That's going to be our enemy's gun that will follow the enemies around. And then in that gun object's logic, what we're going to do is have it point at our player, and when the player is close enough and we've got a clear line of sight, just every 40 frames or so, we're going to fire a bullet at our player. And we're going to have a new bullet object that's going to represent our pinky bullets rather than our yellow ones, and they'll move a bit slower. But they'll more or less act the same. We'll have the same hit sparks and all that kind of thing. And that's really all there is to it. So like half of this, you could say, is we've already done by creating the gun and the bullet for the player, and we're going to be reusing a lot of that stuff. And then the other half of it is just providing that sort of loop of checking to see if the player is near enough and whether or not we've got a line of sight. That's the kind of new stuff that we need to do to get this to work. So the first thing we need to do is make our new gun object. So I'm going to right click in objects, hit create object, and I'm going to call this OE gun for enemy gun. I'm going to set the sprite to match S gun. I'm not duplicating O gun for this because it's going to be different enough as an object that it's not really worth duplicating. Now we'd have to get rid of more code than we'd be copying. So we're creating a brand new object for this. I'm going to add the create event first of all. We only actually need one variable for this guy, and that's countdown equals 40. This is just going to be the number of frames. The value isn't in and of itself. We'll be setting that number later on in the step code. But this value is just going to represent how close we are to firing our next bullet. So we're going to tick it down when it hits 0. We fire a bullet and then we'll put it back to 40 and so on, okay? One other thing we should do actually, just differentiates from my script, going a little bit off script here, but just to make this a little bit rare. Countdown rate, I'm going to set to 40. And then actually I'm going to move this underneath and set countdown to equal countdown rate, because I feel like we use too many magic numbers in this series, and I've always tried to point them out when I can and say, you shouldn't do this, you should probably set this as a variable, and this is how we do that. So our countdown rate is going to be 40 frames. I'm going to set down to countdown rate, and then we can just keep changing that. And then we only have this one variable here, the number that we need to change at any point in time, okay? And that's what I mean by not using magic numbers, is by like setting those numbers in there rather than just hard coding them later in. And you'll see where we do that as we come to it. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's adjust our view a little bit, because we're going to do a bunch more code here. So let's close away these windows and maximize this. I'll press F8 a bunch of times and just make this font nice and big. And we're going to add the begin step event. Okay, so I'm going to right click, go to add open event, step, begin step. Again, it's the begin step rather than the step, because it gives us that nice dragging effect by always being 1 pixel behind wherever the enemy is, just like how our gun object is always 1 pixel behind wherever the player is, okay? So at the top here, what we're going to do is first of all have this follow the enemy that it's been spawned with, okay? We haven't written the code to spawn these guns yet, but when we do, we're going to assign each instance of e-gun an owner, okay? And it's going to be in that in a variable called owner. So our x is going to equal owner.x. And then our y coordinate is going to equal owner.y plus 10. Don't worry too much about the syntax error window, we'll just pop this down here. Always comes up while you're typing, it's a bit of a pain. Next up, we need to size the gun based on our enemy, because we know these can be at different sizes as well. So I'm going to type image x scale equal abs owner.image x scale. The reason I use abs there, you put any number into abs, I may have covered it before, but any number you put into abs will always return positive. So if I put 7 into abs, I get 7 back. If I put -5 into abs, I get 5 back, okay? Very simple stuff. The reason I do that is in case we've used image x scale to like flip the enemy, we'll definitely always get back the whole integer so that we don't accidentally flip the gun in the same way, because we're going to control that differently via image angle and so on. And we're going to do the same with image y scale. So image y scale equal abs owner.image y scale. Next up, we're going to check to see if the player currently exists. If they don't exist, then that would screw up a lot of what we wanted to do next, and we need to make sure they do exist. So if instance exists, player. So make sure there is a player currently in the game. If player.x is less than our current x coordinate, then what we know from that is that our player is to the left of this gun, or if it's not true, they're to the right of the gun, right? So that means we can invert our image y scale to make sure it's we flip the gun vertically when it's pointing left, so that when it rotates around like that full 180 degrees, it flips over so it doesn't look like he's sort of holding it upside down behind him, unless you want him to look like that. I think it looks a bit weird with our current art. So image y scale is going to equal negative image y scale. And that works, and it's not going to flip it every time because we've set it already to be definitely positive up here, okay? Next up, I'm going to say if point underscore distance player.x player.y x, y. So that will return the distance from our player's x and y coordinate to this instance's x and y coordinate. Okay, so from the gun to the player. If that distance is less than 600, we are going to aim at the player and begin countdown for shooting. Okay, so image underscore angle equal point direction. Again, we just fill in the coordinates from one point to another point to get that angle, and that's going to be player.x. Oh no, sorry, that would be the opposite direction. It's going to be x and y of our current gun towards player.x and player.y. Okay, so that will point us in the correct direction. And then countdown, which was our variable we made in the create event, is going to be subtracted by 1. So I'm just going to type countdown minus minus semicolon. I'll just remove 1 from it. Then if countdown is less than or equal to 0, I don't know how it would be less than, but just in case, you know, countdown equal countdown rate. And this is what I mean by a magic number. So what I could have written in here was just countdown 40. I'm sure I've gone over this before, but it's an important point. to keep making sure, because I sometimes do use magic numbers in my code, like I've used one here, just 600 and so on. And here, there's +10, and you should avoid them wherever you can. Always try and make variables whenever you can to store your numbers in, because then it makes editing your code way easier if you need to change those numbers from the create event, and so on. It's just good practice, okay? So rather than writing countdown equal 40, I can now write countdown rate, because I set that variable up. Countdown rate, as we know, is 40. Okay, cool. And I'm just going to leave a comment here for now, bullet code here, and this is where when we get a bit further along, we're going to copy and paste some code from ogun to actually create the bullet, just in the same way that our gun creates a bullet, the player's gun, okay? Okay, so we're obviously going to come back to this, but for now this is everything we need. The next thing we're going to do is go to our enemy object and make sure they can have guns to begin with, okay? So I'm going to double click enemy, and in the variable definitions window, just click this if it isn't open already. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to add another boolean down here. I'm going to add this one, and it's going to be called has weapon. Select boolean from here, and we're going to have it as false by default. We're going to pick and choose which enemies we want to actually have guns, okay? So I'm going to go into the create event now for the enemy object, okay? And let's just maximize this. So we've got our enemy code all here. Currently there shouldn't be anything in your enemy's create event. Let's say I've had to actually add that event. But what we're going to do is check to see if that boolean we've just added, has weapon, is true or not. So I'm going to type if has weapon. Open brackets, and in here I'm going to say if this instance is marked to have a weapon, then my gun equals instance create layer xy, the gun layer appropriately enough, oe gun. Okay. So that's going to create an instance of egun, and it's going to plonk that the ID of that instance into my gun. So we can now affect my gun just by using it, and that's what we're going to do now with my gun. I mean, we could, as I'm pretty sure we've done before, done with and then put this instance create statement in here, but this is helpful because it allows us to refer back to our gun later, so that when our enemy dies, for instance, we can get rid of the gun and so on, okay? So that just makes that a little bit more versatile. So with my gun, owner is going to equal other.id. You might remember owner, the variable from inside the gun. Up here, this is the variable we use to follow our owner around, okay? So I'm going to set owner to equal other.id, other from inside the with statement is going to refer back to the instance of the enemy, okay? So the enemy's ID is going to get put into the gun, and as that's going to represent which instance the gun should follow around, okay? And then the only other thing we need to do in here, just close this down and say else. So if has weapon isn't true, my gun equals no one, okay? So that when we refer back to this variable later in code, we're not going to find like a variable missing error if we try and do something with my gun and we didn't create one in the first place, okay? Speaking of, that's exactly what we're going to do now. So I'm going to go to begin step in enemy, and just down here where we destroyed the instance of enemy if we ran out of hit points. Just before that, I'm going to write with my gun instance destroy. So obviously that's going to find either the ID of the gun if it has one, or it's going to find the keyword no one. And obviously it can't destroy nothing, right? So then it won't do anything. I'm going to hit the run button and just see what we have. Oh no, we won't have anything yet because we haven't actually marked any enemies to have guns. So let's go do that first. I'm going to go into level 1. I've actually made completely devoid of enemies. You can just pick up the gun and move on. And level 2, I'm going to mark this guy as having a gun. So let's go to variables, just go along the bottom here, has weapon, mark this for editing and mark it true. And the exact same for this guy over here. And just to show that we can still leave them without guns and have that work, we'll leave this guy without a weapon for now, okay? So let's save that. Now if we run the game, hopefully we'll see, I'll do this a little bit more armed than they were before. So obviously I've got to walk through here. Let's grab the gun. Obviously we've created a bit of a weird bug at the moment because you don't have to shoot those crates anymore. You could walk through here without a gun, and we'll prepare for that, I think, in a later episode. But obviously for now, if you did that, I think when you spawned in here, it would just give you the gun anyway, because I think that's how our game is currently set up. So you can see this guy currently has a gun now, and he's pointing it at us, and you see it's pointing the correct way, and it's flipping and aiming correctly, no matter which side of him I'm on. So if I kill him now as well, and the gun just disappears. You might want to do something else with that. I'll leave that to you and your imagination, what you want to happen to the gun if they die. But obviously, since we get rid of that enemy instance and so on, we couldn't have it just keep trying to follow the position. So I just decided to get rid of it. You can do whatever you like. So this guy still doesn't have a gun. Well, take my word for it, or just scroll back in the video like 10 seconds. He definitely didn't have a gun. And this guy does, and he's aiming. That's okay. Okay, so the tick down is currently working. Like, they are ticking down, the number is ticking down, or you'll just have to take my word for that. You can't really tell at the moment, but I guarantee you that number countdown is ticking down. We just haven't put any code in to actually make them shoot yet. So I'm gonna pay a short visit to O-Gun, the object, okay? And in the begin step, let's maximize this briefly. Let's scroll down to, I'm going to press F7, just make this smaller just so we can actually see. Get rid of these a bit. Here it is. I think this is what we want. So we don't need firing delay, we don't need recoil, we don't need screen shake for when the enemies shoot. I'm going to keep that for when the player shoots. But we do want to set the pitch of sound shot, we do want to play the sound effect, and we do want to create the bullet. So from audio sound pitch here all the way down to the end of this with statement where we create that bullet, I'm going to copy that chunk of code. Up to you whether you want to go and re-implement the recoil stuff in the enemy guns. That might be worth it as well, just to add that little nice effect, but I don't want to make these videos super long while I copy across and readjust all those different elements of polish. I just want to show you how to get this stuff working. So let's come back to not O enemy, we want OE gun. Okay, so in the enemy gun, so if countdown is less than or equal to 0, set countdown to countdown rate and bullet code here. So where I wrote bullet code here, just gonna select that and hit paste. Okay, Control and V. So that pastes that code in, so that will now set the pitch of that accordingly, play the sound, create a bullet, with the right speed, from the right position, in the right angle. But you see it's creating a bullet. That's going to create one of our player's bullets, which will cause it to hit itself, right? Which we don't want. So I'm going to change this to E bullet, that's capital E and lowercase b. But obviously you can see that object doesn't actually exist yet, so it'll think it's a variable or something, okay? It's not red, but we're going to create that in a second, so don't worry too much about it. And speed, we're going to change to be speed of 10, okay? We're going to make them move way slower than our player's bullets, because the feel isn't as important to them, and we want to make sure that the player is able to like dodge out of the way of them, okay? We made the bullet bigger to feel like they are more powerful, and they are more powerful as well, because they're going to kill our player in a single hit, as opposed to like the 4 or 5 we have to hit the enemies with as well, okay? Now let's actually go ahead and create our new bullet. So right click on O bullet, I am going to duplicate this one, so right click on O bullet and go to duplicate, and that'll give you O bullet 1, but let's just change the name to OE bullet, capital E, lowercase b, or whatever your naming convention is for your project. So we've got OE bullet, and it's exactly the same as our O bullet, okay? But we're going to remove a chunk of code, okay? So I'm going to delete P shootable. You could, if you like, create a parent-child relationship with O bullet and OB bullet. I think it's a little bit easier to just create a duplicate in this particular scenario, but it's up to you. Sorry, just to go over, I did that very quickly. What I'm doing here is in OE bullet step event, the section where we would check to see if we collide with a P shootable, i.e. an enemy, or a crate or something like that, something that the player would shoot at. We're going to get rid of that section, otherwise the bullet can collide with the enemy that shot it, which is obviously no good. They'll just be shooting themselves then, right? So we're going to get rid of that. We'll still have it keep the section with it hitting walls, and all the animation end stuff, all the rest of it is absolutely fine, okay? other than we obviously need to change the sprite, so make sure you change the sprite from SBullet to SE Bullet. I showed you that right at the start of this episode. I'm sure you can, I will add it to the assets folder, but I'm sure you could probably create that yourself. I literally made it 2 pixels wider and changed the color. So once you've set that sprite to be correct, that should be, I think, everything we need. The only thing the bullet doesn't do now is collide with the player and kill them, but let's just make sure that the bullets are actually working as we expect them to first. So let's go to continue, because that'll bring us back straight into this level where the guy was with the gun, and as you can see there, he's shooting at us. And you can see it's creating our hit sparks and everything when it hits the wall, just like our other bullets did, because we just copied them. And you can see they're firing. And now you could take this opportunity to change the rate of fire or do whatever else you want to those enemy bullets if they don't feel correct for you. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is make it so our player, when they collide with an enemy bullet, they die, okay? So if we come into our O player, in the collision event with O enemy, we've got all this code that makes us die, which we've covered before when we change into OP dead, and we fly off in a different direction, we get rid of our gun, and so on. There's a bunch of different things we're doing in here. Now, this is a bunch of different things we're doing in here, and you might want to change them or adjust them, and the problem is we've kind of made an assumption in our code structure that colliding with O enemy is the only time this would ever happen, right? When actually we now want to do it when we collide with an OE bullet as well, and we might want to do it with all kinds of things. If we touch a spike, if we touch lava, or whatever else in your game might pose an existential threat to the player, okay? So it doesn't really make sense to have just this big chunk of code here that we're going to be duplicating lots, and then if we ever want to change it, we'd have to change it across every different instance of thing that would kill the player. So I'm going to select all this code, I'm going to cut it with Control X, and I'm going to type kill player, open bracket, close bracket, semicolon in here. And we're going to create a script that just does this. So right click in scripts, hit create script, paste that chunk of code in with Control V, and rename the script kill player with the exact same capitalization, exact same spelling as you wrote it in here. And you see that's now turned yellow because it's just going to call this chunk of code now every time we write kill player. So now what we can also do is simply add an event to collision with OE bullet and do the exact same thing, kill player, okay? The only other thing we will then want to do is do with other, which is going to return the other ID in a collision event, so it's going to return the ID of the bullet that just collided with us. Instance destroy, so that basically so that the bullet itself doesn't appear to like fly through the player. The bullet itself destroys on impact as well after we've done all our collision stuff and killed the player. Now, I was about to say that that's all there is to it and run the game and show you and be like, thanks for watching guys, catch you next time, but there is one last thing we've actually forgotten to do because I've scripted this video poorly and missed out somehow this one line of code. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come back to, it's not a huge thing, but it'll make things just feel a little bit better. If we come to our gun object and in the begin step where we work out if we're shooting, we're just shooting if we're within range at the moment. We're not actually taking our environment into account, so we don't want to just shoot wildly at the player if there's no chance of us hitting him, or if we can't see the player, right, in theory, because of walls and so on and so forth. So if countdown is less than or equal to 0, what I'm going to do is in here I'm going to wrap all this around a second if statement. And that's going to be if no collision line and between, stupid syntax errors, get out of the way. In fact, let's maximize this. If not collision line x, y, o player dot x, o player dot y, o wall, precise false and not me false, close bracket, close bracket. Okay, and so this line is going to create a virtual line in space between the x and y of the gun and the x and y of the player, and check to see if there are any instances of a wall, okay, along that line. We're only doing it once every 40 frames, so it's not too big of a, what do we call it, like CPU hog, or not too much of a slowdown, you know, not too much of a worry doing a big collision line. because we're only doing once every 40 frames. And if there is no collision, then we do all of this nonsense, okay? Just tab, remove that. In fact, I'm going to put countdown, I'm going to put this outside of here so that we always make sure we only do it once every 40 frames, otherwise we'd keep doing it in kind of a loop. Okay, so just by doing that, that'll make it so that when our bullets shoot, which they hopefully will now that we've done everything else required, they only shoot if, yeah, you can see he's not shooting now, and you'll have noticed if you watch back earlier in the video, he was doing before. He's not trying to like shoot through the floor as, but he will shoot as if he can see us, which is, there you go, got it. And he got me as well, so that we know that works now as well. We know getting hit by the bullet also works. So there you have it, that's how you do enemies that shoot back at you. So let's just see, this guy still doesn't have his gun, this one still does. Ooh, we dodged that pretty well, and that's all there is to it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed this one. See you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. I know I've not been putting out a lot of stuff lately, there's been a lot of personal stuff going on in my life, but most of that's all out of the way now, so hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more stuff from me in the very near future. Thank you as always to my Patreon supporters for supporting the work that I do. I couldn't make any of it without them. Thank you in particular, and in no particular order, to Mark Lintz, Dan, Mike Blankier, Thomas van den Eend, Run, Turtle Time, Valp, Cody Hodkinson, Lewis R. Pereira, Zephyr Flame, Rovan Darlan, Robert Churches, TJ, James Grumley, Patrick Guffey, Michael Ward, Matt Coate, Zinan May, Shaunathan, Nick Slabish, Stephen Hagen, Bowser the Dog, Harold Gidry, Jason McMillan, and Owen Morgan. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you for watching. Thanks guys, catch you guys next time.